G'day chaps, 'tis I, Clownpuncher139. When I'm defending the Arkham games from Sin's channels or sins of my own, one aspect I'll often point to are the interview tapes. A lot of players completely overlook their existence after Arkham Asylum, since you get them through Riddler challenges rather than collecting them on the map. Today, I'd just like to talk about them, what they reveal about key plot points, what backstory they may give, or just how impactful they are. And I'll start in a game that I haven't even heard the tapes for yet, Arkham Origins. Well, before we start, I guess it's worth mentioning that Origins doesn't actually have interview tapes, rather it has extortion files. In case you've forgotten what happens in this game, Enigma has collected blackmail on just about everyone in Gotham and plans to release it on Christmas morning. Upon Batman collecting enough of the hidden data packs, he gains access to dirty audio files on all the important figures in Gotham. What Batman actually does with these files is up in the air, but I'm guessing he just locks them down never to see the light of day. Anyway, with that backstory out of the way, let's get going. First up is, surprisingly, a file on the cleanest man in Gotham, James Gordon. For those out of the loop, Gordon is the shining beacon among an entire precinct of corrupt cops. He's the only one who actually does it by the book, and doesn't take bribes from criminals to turn a blind eye. So it's kinda surprising to see Enigma has a blackmail file on him, until you actually listen to it. He's having a conversation with Barbara, who's gone to the station late at night to inform her dad about some suspicious characters outside their house. Turns out they aren't your common criminals, but the very police force Gordon works for.
So it's come to that. Bastards.
The corrupt force has started stalking Gordon and his family, either trying to turn him to their side or scope out a weakness to get him fired. He gives Barbara a police radio and a list of police channels, with certain channels the corrupt officers use for their own communication they think Gordon doesn't know about. Barbara is very apprehensive. She knows if she's found with this radio that Gordon will lose his job. Gordon knows this, but doesn't care because the corrupt cops are already after him. He may as well use this to stay one step ahead. I'm assuming he gives the radio to Barbara to have her listen in on the corrupt dealings so they can bust them much easier. Since she knows the cops he works for are crooks, she clearly wants to make a difference. It only makes sense to get her to help, given how smart she is. It's definitely flimsy blackmail at best on Enigma's part, but he of all people would know that Gordon is otherwise completely clean. He knows Gordon would be the one thing getting Gotham back in line, so took any dirt on him that he could. Next, we have a couple tapes on Alberto Falcone. You know, the guy Penguin was beating up before we rudely interrupted him. He plays basically no role in this story, so it's a little surprising to have 3 tapes on him while a big character like Gordon only gets 1. His first tape is a call from Dr. Harleen Quinzel about an appointment with Hugo Strange. Those who have seen my Arkham Iceberg video would know that Strange was a psychiatrist at Blackgate and Quinzel was interning under him at the time of Arkham Origins. He was treating Falcone among other inmates for psychological issues. The exact details aren't explained in the game, though a little digging explains exactly what they're talking about. Alberto suffers from a dissociative identity disorder in which he has an alternate personality referred to in the comics as the Holiday Killer. It can be assumed that Alberto's other personality is making him skip his therapy sessions with Strange, since he is clearly not better like he claims to be. At this point, we don't know if Strange has fallen to madness as we see in Arkham City. It can be assumed he still prods his test subjects' brains in a similar fashion to his later encounters, given how Alberto describes his sessions.
Listen, I'm not one of Strange's test subjects to be poked and prodded. Have you forgotten who I am? Who my father is?
It's definitely some good dirt on the Falcones, given that Alberto is the black sheep of the family. His second tape is a conversation with Black Mask. Black Mask apparently overheard a juicy conversation of Alberto at a restaurant the other night, though the details are almost non-existent. Black Mask hints towards the idea that Alberto was talking about his future in some capacity, potentially implying Alberto was talking about overshadowing his father and taking over the business himself. Seems to me like Black Mask was using that information as leverage to get Alberto to abandon his family. Now, notice that I was always calling him Black Mask, never the much simpler Roman or Sionis. This is because we don't really know if this is actually Roman or Joker pretending to be Black Mask. We know it happened sometime before the events of Origins, given Joker's tape we'll get to later, but we don't know when these tapes take place. And given the last tape, it's entirely possible this is Joker trying to divide the families even more. His third tape is another call to Black Mask, this time confirmed to be Sionis just by his voice and tone. Alberto has embraced his Holiday Killer personality and has called Roman with a threat to his life. He claims to be serving a higher power, that he is a higher power, and that Roman will have a lot to answer for one day. As I said, we know this is Sionis' Black Mask given how he's speaking. He's just woken up in the middle of the night to answer a phone call and hears this dark, evil voice greeting him.
Hello, Sionis.
Who the hell is this? What time is it?
He's groggy and confused, so we know it's not Joker talking here. We don't know if the same can be said above, given how this event plays out. I kinda assume it is actually Roman in the second tape, because if Joker was impersonating him while he was still running around, that just wouldn't make sense. The next tape goes to the one and only Bane. He has an in-depth discussion of his addiction to Venom and his tests with TN1. Bane has apparently been fighting his Venom addiction for some time now, as he recognizes his reliance on the drug as a weakness he must overcome. He tried to eradicate Venom and wipe its manufacturers from the earth. However, he eventually came across TN1, a replacement drug that would eliminate Venom's addictive properties, and holds promise of a permanent effect in exchange for a few nasty side effects. Early test subjects had to be terminated immediately, likely due to being unstable, raging machines that couldn't be controlled. However, later subjects ended up being at least physically stable, though their mentality was far from it. They suffered immediate, long-term memory loss, along with brain degradation that left them
Primitive.
However, his latest batch shows promise, and we'll have to find a suitable volunteer once Batman is eliminated. So, this tape reveals a lot about Bane in the Arkham franchise. The reason he's a big dumb monster in Asylum and City is because he took a bad dose of TN1, leaving his brain degraded and primitive. I suppose the reason he's still at least moderately smart in City is because he's stronger and smarter than all the test subjects he uses, so the TN1 would have a slightly weaker effect on him, thus leaving him at least functioning. What it unfortunately doesn't explain is Arkham Origins Online. This mode takes place sometime after base Origins, and Bane appears to be his normal self again, even though the TN1 effects are supposed to be permanent. This can only mean that either Origins Online isn't canon, or the TN1 effects were able to degrade over time, but Bane took more at a later date. Either way, it doesn't make too much sense and kinda throws the timeline into a bit of a weird state. Let me know if I missed any information in the comments. Next is a pair of tapes from Shiva. Again, despite playing a significantly smaller role than Bane or Gordon, she has more tapes to her name. First is a quick discussion with Bane taking place just before the main events of the game. She references the bounty on Batman's head and how they're both in Gotham to claim it. It sounds like she and Bane have a bit of a history by the way they speak for the rest of the tape though. They reference the Master, and Bane questions what he is planning. And judging by the second tape, we can make a pretty good assumption of who the Master is. The second tape is a conversation with old Sharpie, where Shiva seems to be bribing him into taking the position of Warden at Arkham Asylum. She says Sharp and her master want the same thing, to purge the city of criminals. Sound familiar? Her master is none other than Ra's al Ghul. What this means is that Ra's was working behind the scenes of Arkham Origins and apparently had connections to Bane. I don't know if Bane always had a connection to the League of Assassins in the comics, or if this was an addition made in Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy, but it's a great piece of trivia regardless. This shows that Ra's has been manipulating events leading to Arkham City from all the way back in Origins. He was getting Sharp ready to be taken over by Strange, and used Shiva as a way to test Batman early on. It's really cool, and kind of a shame that more players don't know about this. Next, we have the Penguin. Despite having a rather small role here, we all know how important he is later in the saga, so it makes sense Enigma would have some dirt on him. Especially since at this point in the story, he isn't the big supercriminal we all know him as. At this point in the timeline, he's up and coming, only now starting to pose a threat to the other crime bosses. His first file is a conversation with Candy, who I assume has just returned from an information scavenge. Apparently, Sionis has a new hobby, collecting masks, even though he was already Black Mask, and Penguin does refer to him as such.
We need to keep an eye on our friend Black Mask.
So, by process of elimination, we can assume this is Joker doing the mask collecting, possibly hinting at his takeover and rebranding of Black Mask's crew with the clown masks. The second file isn't even of Penguin, but rather one of his men, in an interrogation with a cop. The cop brings up the fact that they found evidence of Penguin at Lacey Towers, the supposed murder place of Black Mask. The criminal obviously denies any wrongdoing on behalf of his boss, but it doesn't really matter. They have the evidence, and Cobblepot is going down.
Now, if that evidence should happen to disappear...
The thug says the payment will be in the usual place, essentially confirming that these cops and Penguin's crew have a mutual understanding at this point. Now, this is actually pretty interesting, because we the player know that Penguin is completely innocent, but I don't believe Batman ever brings that evidence forward. So this is why Penguin doesn't get convicted. He has his men bail him out with bribes to the corrupt cops, most notably Branden. And the third file is another without Penguin himself, but his gang nonetheless. It's a thug talking it out with a cop about the assassins and what their crew could get out of them. In other words, they're looking for who to sell weapons to. Deathstroke and Deadshot are easy for guns and ammo, Copperhead and Firefly are no-goes because they don't use traditional weapons, and Bane is the money shot, what with his whole army, if he doesn't rip your arms off. This tape actually takes place after the assassins make their way to Gotham, because at this point, Loeb is dead, so the corrupt cops have to start using different channels because of Gordon, and of course ends with a thug offering to take Gordon out to make their lives easier.
Maybe we can help you with that.
Penguin's tapes overall aren't too significant, but they do give a bit of interesting insight if you look below the surface. It kinda shows that Penguin was doing a lot more behind the scenes than we gave him credit for. While it isn't spelled out as fact, it's implied that his crew supplied at least Bane with his weapons, and kinda set up his role for Origins Online. In case you didn't know, Penguin was the one supplying weapons for the likes of Bane and Joker's crew. So I suppose this was setting that up by having him looking for opportunities to sell it to the assassins. It's kind of interesting, but doesn't really impact the overall story too much. Next we have Anarky, one I'm very excited about because of how good his side mission was. His first is a call to Gordon, which actually got me really excited. Anarky talks to him like he does to Batman, impressed that he's clean, but naive to the world around him. He calls him a cog in a voracious machine, one that supports oppression at the call of corporate masters.
The mayor wouldn't wipe his ass without permission from people like Rupert Thorne.
Despite Gordon's questionable profession, Anarky believes he can still do some good, so warns him to get out while he still can. In other words, Anarky is telling him about the bombs he placed under the GCPD and wants him to get out as the only clean man in Gotham. This is interesting because it shows that Anarky really cares about and believes in his cause. He truly wants to help the people destroy the corruption around them and wants any assistance he can get. He tries to recruit Gordon to his cause, but Gordon stands his ground as well. He believes in the police force he joined, so he refuses. And honestly, his second tape is even more interesting, because it plants the idea that Anarky didn't necessarily want to cause all the chaos he ultimately did, or possibly hints at the side mission in Cold Heart. I'll leave that to you to decide. The file is between a hobo and a cop, the hobo being brought up on multiple charges. However, the cop can get him off if he helps him get to Anarky. He wants him to join the gang, make suggestions, or even start riots. The cop says something very interesting that I can't help but find way too true.
But talk is cheap. No one wants to be the first one to do it.
And he's kinda right. Everyone can talk a big game, but it takes a real Chad to be the one to actually go through with it. That's where this guy comes in. Once the riled up folks see one person actually going through, they see no reason not to join in. The cop finally notes that Anarky doesn't have the poor's best interests in mind, that he's only using them for his own agenda. But we know this isn't true. For all the talk he has, Anarky seems to genuinely care about his cause, and doesn't appear to have any ulterior motives. So this cop is totally gaslighting this guy. Now what makes me think this is a hint towards Cold Heart is the fact that this cop is telling the guy to start rioting, which is not something Anarky directly advocated for. His crew was always busy planting the bombs, never starting riots in the streets. There may have been a few dispatch missions that involved Anarky's crew, but I can't really recall it. I think it's the Anarky supporters that rioted during New Year's in support of their captured idol, and this cop is attempting to use this guy to make them riot and make them easier to capture. It's pretty interesting because I don't think Anarky would want his crew rioting. He wants to blow up the buildings that represent the worst of Gotham, so what would having his crew destroy little shops in the Bowery do in accomplishing that? If you have any ideas about this, let me know, because I've been on this entry for a bit too long, I'd say. Next up is the man who started this whole game, Commissioner Loeb. I'm expecting some good stuff on him, seeing as he's pretty much the most corrupt man in Gotham who isn't directly a criminal. His first tape isn't subtle in the slightest. It's a conversation with Black Mask about getting Gordon under control, or rather cutting him off from the police force. However, Black Mask, knowing that he's clean, sees him as an opportunity for good PR, so he wants to get him under control as a pawn in their back pocket. Loeb, though, knows that it's impossible. He thinks it would be easier to just call a beat on him. Sionis knows that approach has already failed, possibly indicating Gordon's impressive fighting capabilities he shows off at the end of the game. It ends with Sionis leaving Loeb to figure it out himself, telling him to try focusing on Gordon's principles to knock him down. The second is a little more interesting as it takes place between Loeb and Bullock. In the slight off chance you don't know, Harvey Bullock is Gordon's partner, who also happens to be pretty corrupt, though he's a lot more gray than the rest of the PD. He shares Gordon's vision of justice and will usually do the right thing when presented the opportunity. But as someone like Penguin would say, everyone has a price. And this tape kinda shows that off. Harvey notes that Gordon trusts him about as far as he could throw him.
So, not very far at all.
Loeb turns that back on him by calling him,
You're a fat slob who needs to start earning his keep.
which basically shows what I mentioned about Harvey earlier. He may be on the payroll, but he's lazy and isn't as corrupt as most of his colleagues. Anyway, Loeb tells Bullock that Gordon has a taste for a certain type of women, claiming that he has something called Lancelot syndrome. Now, I tried looking that up to give some more clues on what he's talking about, but I could only find a terrible Urban Dictionary definition of Lancelot himself and a bunch of books called Lancelot syndrome. But I'm assuming it has something to do with taking a mistress, judging by how they're speaking. The tape ends rather abruptly, with Loeb leaving the details to Bullock and just telling him not to make a mess out of it. The last tape is with Branden, the dickwad SWAT leader. He says that Batman is leaving a lot of his men spooked, to the point that they're even calling in sick just to avoid the bat. Loeb tells Branden to fire them because he doesn't want a bunch of fence-sitters on his force when he's about to have City Hall in his back pocket. Branden asks what he should do to get them in, and Loeb responds with,
Cement shoes? You figure it out.
Obviously he's being a little sarcastic here, but it definitely sounds like he's losing control of his precinct because of Batman, and will go to just about any lengths to keep people in. The tape ends with Loeb's secretary coming in with a call from Warden Joseph, and that's it. I have a feeling this call was in regards to the Blackgate riot breaking out right before the start of the game. So this was Joseph calling in the police for backup, which eventually got Loeb thrown in the gas chamber. Honestly, not too much for Loeb. I was a little disappointed. It is interesting that Loeb left the job of bringing Gordon to their level to Bullock, but it sadly doesn't really go anywhere. Next is the aforementioned caller, Warden Joseph himself. His first file is a conversation with Dr. Quinzel. He claims that she needs to perform another re-evaluation of Julian Day, aka Calendar Man, placing this event a long while before the events of the game. Joseph wants Day to get the death penalty, however, he can't do that if he is deemed insane by these evaluations. So he wants Quinzel to perform another evaluation to at least attempt to claim him as sane. Quinzel is confused because she believed their mission was to rehabilitate the sick, but Blackgate is not Arkham.
This is a prison, Miss Quinzel, not a mental health clinic.
So, seeing no other option, Quinzel agrees to perform the reevaluation, which means she and Joseph were kind of responsible for setting the game's events into motion. Joseph forced the reevaluation, allowing Day to be tried as a sane man, leading to him getting the death penalty. And we all know what happened that fateful night. Surprisingly, that isn't the end of the tape, as Quinzel then goes on to more or less manipulate Joseph into giving her a special position. She essentially gets permission to be the first person to perform psychological evaluations, which means this is actually the reason she was the one to interview Joker when he first arrived at Blackgate. This was something I missed when I made the Iceberg video. I thought that since Quinzel was interning under Strange, that he could be the only one to allow her to perform the psych evaluations. But I was wrong. Apparently Joseph has that power and just flat out gave it to her, meaning he was also the one that let Joker escape and crash his prison a second time. And the second is a conversation with Judge Harkness, who I'm assuming is a much more important character than I'm giving him credit for, but I'm just oblivious. Anyway, the two are basically celebrating that they finally convicted Calendar Man, though Joseph is a little wary about the execution date being Christmas Eve. The judge calls it
Poetic justice, I say.
and claims that people will love it. He also says that he'll be hosting a party at his house where they'll watch the execution. He wants Joseph to come by with his wife and pick up his gift. Joseph says he will, if there's something for his wife too.
She likes diamonds.
The judge huffs, claiming he was told Joseph was soft. Well, this is kind of interesting, because Joseph is supposed to be a pretty clean man, if Batman trusting him is anything to go by. However, this supposed gift from the judge implies that he was either on someone's payroll, or this is an actual gift from the judge himself for getting rid of Calendar Man. Either way implies corruption, though it's not really known to what extent. Our penultimate party member to be extorted is Officer Howard Branden. Yes, this is the first time I've heard his first name, and I'm betting you all are too. Unfortunately, despite being a pretty prevalent force, his tapes are kind of boring. His first is a barely minute-long conversation with Loeb about an off-the-books upcoming job. Loeb says Branden will receive a call from a third party requiring his services in the next few days, who will identify himself with the code word facade. Loeb calls it an investment against future favors and leaves it at that. And that was it. This doesn't really add too much lore if I'm being honest. I'm going to assume this is in reference to the hit on Batman, and the call will be from Black Mask Joker recruiting Branden and SWAT to the cause. If it isn't, I honestly have no idea what this could be in reference to. It's so short and vague that it could be just about anything. However, with the code word being facade, an outward appearance used to conceal an unpleasant reality, and Joker taking Black Mask's identity being a facade, I think my assumption is correct. The other tape is a conversation with presumably one of Branden's longtime contacts, or potentially old friends. Anyway, the two are stealing gear for a new task force that Loeb is going to be starting, with Branden as the leader. His reason for stealing being so they don't have to deal with a lot of red tape. Or in other words, excessive adherence to the rules when they need to mobilize. In other words, they're an off-the-books task force for really special occasions. He invites his buddy to join them, but he declines knowing he'd be putting his job at risk. And I just realized after the fact that this could actually be in reference to the SWAT team that ends up guarding the Gotham Royal when Joker has the meeting with the assassins. And that's actually pretty interesting. It kinda explains why SWAT was providing security, but basically no one questioned it. It wasn't SWAT, but an off-the-books task force Loeb had set up for Black Mask as part of their deals. And last, but certainly not least, we have the man, myth, and legend, the Joker himself. Albeit the first tape has him disguised as Black Mask, so we don't really get the full Troy Baker special. It's a conversation between him and a cop with supposedly good information on Penguin, and takes place sometime after the first Blackgate riot, because he notes that he had just killed the commissioner. Basically, Penguin is about to make a move on Falcone turf, but Joker doesn't care. The cop says that there's a mutual understanding of balance among the gangs, with Sionis currently on top, and if someone like Penguin starts making too much money, that balance will start to tip. Joker does as Joker do, and states that he doesn't like balance. It's time to upset the balance. Introduce a little chaos, if you will. Honestly, not too much of interest here, because it's all information we kinda know. Though I guess it is interesting to see Joker not giving a hoot about Penguin for once. Those two are bitter rivals in later games, especially Arkham City, so seeing Joker not care that Cobblepot is about to gain power is a little funny. Now the second tape is a lot more interesting because it gives us some kinda contradictory information. It's Black Mask Joker again, conversing with one of Sionis' men. The mobster says that it's the first Thursday of the month, meaning it's time to deliver the commissioner, and by extension the rest of Gotham PD, their pay. But Joker is rethinking their arrangement and thus won't be paying Loeb anytime soon. This information contradicts a lot of what we know about the plot of this game. The latest that the first Thursday of the month could be is the 7th, meaning at a bare minimum, Joker has held Black Mask captive and been impersonating him for 17 days. While this is certainly not out of the realm of possibility, we know that the Lacey Towers case where Black Mask was supposedly murdered took place at most days ago.
This crime took place days ago.
We know Joker has been impersonating Black Mask for some time because he would need a lot of time to set up the assassins and stay in character. However, 17 days is a bit too much. Batman only says the crime took place several days ago. Now, I'm no numbers expert, but several isn't usually in reference to 17 plus when talking about days. Furthermore, if Black Mask didn't cough up his payment to the PD at the beginning of the month, why wouldn't Loeb have done something about it much sooner? He's obviously only in it for the money, so not seeing a fat check or briefcase of Benjamins on his desk would sound some alarms. So this tape kinda raises more questions than it answers. Was Joker impersonating Black Mask while he was still out and doing business? Or was this just an oversight by the writers that just went unnoticed? I have a feeling it was an oversight. At most, I would think Joker was impersonating Black Mask for a week, given how long ago the Lacey Towers murders were.
Someone killed Black Mask, but this crime took place several days ago.
We know he couldn't have done it before this, or else Sionis wouldn't have been at Lacey Towers, let alone his girlfriend or a body double. So while it is interesting to hear when Joker decided to enact the Blackgate riot, it doesn't really line up with the timeline we have right now. And that, chaps, is all of the Extortion files in Arkham Origins. I won't lie, there was some pretty interesting stuff here. I hope you all learned something from this, because I certainly did. I plan on going through the other audio files as well, so stay tuned for those videos. Thank you so much for watching. And I'll see you later, chaps.